Have you ever just wondered what is going on inside the mind of a man who cheats? Well, today we are diving deep into the psychology of infidelity. We're going to start with a term you've probably heard thrown around, fragile masculinity. We'll look at the behaviors, the incredible mental gymnastics, and even the deep-seated personality traits that science tells us are at the very heart of betrayal. Let's get into it. This quote right here, it's the perfect place to start because it just nails an observable behavior, doesn't it? This idea of a performative strength that's really just hiding a ton of insecurity. It's this mask, this emotional constipation that we're going to peel back today. And this isn't just a clever insult, it's actually a pretty good description of a psychological defense mechanism that we're going to see again and again. So how does this actually play out in the real world? Well, one of the clearest examples is right after a breakup. For a man who's driven by this kind of fragile masculinity, a breakup isn't just a sad event. Oh no. It is perceived as a direct assault on his manhood.
And that perceived attack, it triggers a very specific, almost theatrical set of responses. First, they might pretend they never even cared, acting all cold and distant. Then, you'll almost always see them immediately jump to find validation from someone else, to prove they've still got it. It's not uncommon for them to trash talk their ex just to make themselves feel bigger, or they might flip the whole script and play the victim. But my favorite is the weaponized stoicism. They act totally unbothered right up until they see you moving on. Then that mask slips and the anger comes out.
Okay, so those are the behaviors connected to a certain mindset. But is this just anecdotal, or is there a bigger, measurable pattern here when it comes to infidelity? Let's zoom out from the individual and actually look at what the psychological research says.
A study from the Psychological Association of the Philippines dug into this exact question. And, well, the results were pretty stark. The research scientifically confirmed something that's been a cultural belief for a long time, that when you're talking about fidelity, men and women are often playing by very different rulebooks.
And this chart illustrates the key finding beautifully. What the study found was that males had a higher propensity to commit all three types of infidelity. We're talking physical, emotional, and a mix of both. Now, this isn't about passing a moral judgment. It's about identifying a statistically significant pattern that psychologists are really trying to get to the bottom of.
Okay, so if the data shows this clear pattern, the next big question is how? How does a person actually rationalize this to themselves? How do they live with such a huge gap between what they promise and what they do? Well, it requires some serious mental gymnastics.
The number one tool in their toolbox is a psychological process called compartmentalization. It's basically the brain's way of stuffing conflicting ideas into separate, sealed boxes so they never have to touch. You can think of it like a mental filing system designed specifically to keep guilt and reality from ever running into each other.
There's this really powerful metaphor that explains it perfectly. The chest of drawers versus the plate of spaghetti. For someone who heavily compartmentalizes, life is a chest of drawers. The work drawer is separate from the family drawer, which is separate from the affair drawer. What happens in one has zero impact on the others. The cheating self feels like a totally different person from the married self. Now contrast that with the plate of spaghetti model, where every single noodle is touching every other noodle. One action creates ripple effects across your entire life.
But compartmentalizing isn't their only move. To manage that awful internal friction, what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a person might just change the story they tell themselves. So instead of thinking, I'm a good person doing a bad thing, they reframe it. They tell themselves, hey, this affair proves I'm still exciting and fun. They literally change who they think they are to make it all fit.
So we have the outward behavior, and we have the mental justifications. But where does all of this come from? These patterns don't just appear out of nowhere. They're almost always planted in deeper psychological blueprints that were formed way, way earlier in life. Let's go look at those roots. This research model points to two key factors that directly influence someone's tendency to cheat: gender, which we've already touched on, and this other thing called adult attachment style. This piece is absolutely crucial. It's all about how we learn to bond with other people based on our very first relationships as kids.
The specific style that's most strongly linked to infidelity is the avoidant attachment style. This is a pattern where a person learns from a very young age that getting emotionally close to people is, well, uncomfortable, or maybe even unreliable. It often comes from having strained relationships with parents. So they grow up learning to keep people at arm's length.
And here is the absolute key to understanding this. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, an affair isn't always about seeking more intimacy. It's often about avoiding it. The affair becomes a tool, a way to create distance and sabotage the deep, vulnerable connection in their main relationship that they find so terrifyingly uncomfortable.
Okay, so now we're going to shift from attachment styles into the world of personality traits, and this is where we find the psychological engines behind the most deceptive, manipulative, and truly harmful behaviors. We're talking about a toxic combination of traits known as the dark triad.
The dark triad is made up of 3 distinct but related traits. First up, you have narcissism, that grandiose sense of being better than everyone else, a feeling of entitlement. Second, Machiavellianism. This is the strategic, cunning personality that's all about manipulating people to get what they want. And third, you have psychopathy, which is characterized by high impulsivity, a shocking lack of empathy, and pathological lies.
Now, what's wild is how these different traits predict who will cheat. Take a look at this. Research shows that people who are high in Machiavellianism are calculators. See that dotted line? Their probability of cheating shoots way up when the risk of getting caught is low. But if the risk is high, that probability plummets. For them, cheating is a strategic choice, a risk-reward analysis.
And this sets up a really chilling contrast. Because while the Machiavellian is weighing the odds like a gambler, the person high in psychopathy is playing a totally different game. For them, the risk calculation is completely broken because the consequences just don't register in their brain the same way.
Psychopathy is defined by this whole constellation of traits. The most important parts are a total lack of empathy, guilt, or remorse, and it's combined with pathological lying and a dangerous inability to think about long-term consequences. It's what makes their behavior so impulsive and so destructive. They're missing the emotional breaks the rest of us have.
And this is it, the final crucial takeaway from the research. While narcissism and Machiavellianism are definitely linked to cheating, study after study finds that when you test all 3 of these traits together, psychopathy emerges as the single biggest personality predictor of actual cheating. That combination of pathological lying and a total lack of guilt is a potent, toxic recipe for betrayal.
So this leaves us with a final and pretty provocative thought. We've just spent this time exploring all these psychological games inside the intimate world of a relationship. We've seen how this toxic brew of manipulation, a lack of empathy, and compulsive lying can do massive damage, often while completely flying under the radar. So just think about this. If this psychological blueprint can work so effectively on a personal level, what happens when you scale it up? What are the implications when these exact same traits are at play in our jobs, our communities, or even on the world stage? It's a question that is definitely worth pondering.